Econ kids, this is section 2. So, a little review for you on supply and demand. As you're looking at your supply and demand, you should be practicing some of those things. I could see a supply and demand question on there, not going to lie, this year. It is a weird year, obviously. You'd have to maybe do some description of what's going to happen, but maybe supply and demand with price ceiling, price floor, something like that. I could see that happening. Remember in this section, first of all, competitive markets, obviously, you should know what that is now. Lots and lots on both sides, producers and consumers. As you're looking at the demand curve, remember your demand curve is going to slope downward because as you decide to have prices go lower, people are going to want to substitute that good for something else, and therefore you're going to keep having this, negatively sloped line. So as you look at your price and quantity, you can see your demand curve here. Probably remember the difference between quantity demanded, which is on the line. Only thing that can change that is price, or the whole line itself. So again, as you're drawing something like this out, remember proper labeling, put your P's and Q's on there, have your demand curve down, and if for some reason there's going to be a price change on this particular item, let's say we go from P1 to P2, right? We're going to see Q1 and Q2 in terms of quantity demanded. But if one of those other things, those merit shifters, right, market size expectations, related prices, income, or taste happen, that's when we could see a shift of the entire line because those are non-price determinants. So make sure, again, quantity demanded is on the line, nothing but a price change there. Demand is the entire line. Only thing that can shift that are those things there listed. As you're looking at supply and demand together, your supply curve, again, same as your demand curve, except we're looking at an upward sloping supply curve. As you're looking at that upward sloping supply curve, people are always willing to supply more goods if they can get a higher price. So if I'm a supplier now, remember again, P's and Q's, supply sloping upward. If I can get a higher price for my good, I am going to produce more quantity of that particular good, and that would be a movement along the line. If I'm looking at something that's going to shift the entire supply curve, those are our TRICE, right? Technology related prices, input prices, competition, and expectations. If that happens, you got to have rightward shifting supply curve, for example. And there you go, you got supply shifting out to the right. Those are our non-price determining shifting factors. So as you're looking at it, supply and demand. As you're looking at supply and demand together, like equilibrium prices, quantity clearing prices, none of this should be new to you, obviously, a little review. As you're looking at surpluses and shortages, right? Price above is going to be a surplus, price below is going to be a shortage, and it's going to go to that market clearing price. When you look at the changes overall, when you're looking at different types of shifts, what's going to happen when we put this thing together? You are going to see some of these supply and demand curves in terms of like how do we get a higher price by shifting one of those curves for us. So here we have demand shifting to the right, ending up with a higher price and more quantity. Here we have demand going left, lower price, lower quantity, supply left, right, higher price, lower quantity, supply right, lower price, higher quantity. Can't have these double shifters. Just remember, if you have a double shifter in there, something is indeterminate, something is ambiguous, something is unknown. In this case, we know for a fact the price would be higher, but quantity would be unknown. Here we have the same thing, except price is going to be lower, quantity unknown. When they both go in the same direction, this time we're going to know the price is going to be more, or the quantity is going to be more, but the price is unknown in this case. Here we have quantity is going to be less, price is unknown again. As you look at this next part, what happens when the government starts setting prices? These are your price controls. So it doesn't let supply and demand meet each other. So instead, you're looking at something like a price ceiling. A price ceiling model looks like this. Remember, only binding if we're below, right? So price ceiling will only work if we're below our equilibrium. So if I have my supply and demand here, and this should be my price here at equilibrium, the problem is if the government says, hey, you know what, that price is just simply too high, we could do something like this, like a price ceiling in here, and now all of a sudden we have a binding price ceiling down here. This is binding. If we put a price ceiling up here someplace, that is not a binding price ceiling, and you will end up just going to equilibrium. So don't get caught there. If you are, why do these things happen? There's some examples for you. Remember, black markets will happen. You get lots of wasted resources when these things happen. Could you see this on your test? I think you could. Lots of questions we could ask. You know, if you're looking at, hey, this binding price ceiling is going to happen, what's going to happen to my quantity? Well, here's my quantity supplied, here's my quantity demanded, therefore I'm going to end up with a shortage down here. Like, I could see them asking questions like that. There aren't too many past examples of this, but there's a few where it will give you a supply demand problem and then they'll just do stuff with it. And one of the things they'll do is something like price ceilings and price floors. All right, what happens if I decide to throw a price floor in there? Price floor is usually for producers, right, where we're trying to get a higher price, putting a price floor on there. Remember, my price floor is only binding if it's above. So right here is a binding price floor, right? Now that binding price floor forces my price to be up here. My supplier's like this, right? So now I got quantity supplied here, but my demanders are like, I don't think so, don't like that there. So then what's going to happen? I'm going to end up with a surplus of those particular goods, right? Whatever that might be. Sometimes the government might buy up that surplus. Sometimes they do things. Farmers dumping milk, for example. That's going to be what happens up there. So what happens? You got inefficiently low quantity, wasted resources, black market for labor again is going to happen. If you decide to put some sort of minimum wage too high, we know people are willing to work for less than that, and then of course they will, and you'll just pay them under the table, getting to that equilibrium price for wages. This was an example where they had a world price, and that just worked like a price ceiling, like a binding price ceiling, because we could get the price that the world was offering, even though domestically we had a higher price overall. And then we would import that. I could see that. I don't know, micro or macro, either one. You could maybe see a question like that. Last but not least, what happens when we have a quota in here? We could throw up a quota instead of something like this. Again, over here, if we were doing that and we wanted to get to, let's say, this quantity here, we could just put up a quota. And in our quota, we could say, hey, the government's only going to let us do this much. When that happens, of course, we're short of equilibrium in terms of quantities. This is a quantity control that will do things like jack the price up for the consumer. Again, here the producer is going to pay a different price. So this is the price for producers. This now is price for the consumers. And then we get this box in here. And that box is going to be the wedge that's jammed in, and we refer to that as rent. There is a deadweight loss in this situation. My deadweight loss is here. There's deadweight losses in the other ones too, but this is easy to see because you're used to it. And in that particular case, that's why like people don't like quotas or people don't like price floors and price ceilings. As you're looking at that, wedge is jammed in. And of course, we get illegal activity. Here's our example of like overfishing the ocean. You know, we put a quota in there, but people don't like it. So instead, they're going to, you know, do something else, overfish, and then like we don't have as many fish to repopulate because people don't obey the law, or they'll go, you know, license their boat someplace else and not have to pay that rent. Because they don't do that, they take too many. So again, this was the rent in there, and we're shortening the quota. The other ones, price ceiling and price floor. we're doing some sort of a price control on it instead. That's what Section 2 is all about. Maybe I don't know what they would do with price with supply and demand. They might try to put that in there as one of those two questions as part of the one question. But I could see something like a price floor, price ceiling, and then do something. Or what happens if they give you a supply demand problem and then they shift supply on you and then they jam a price floor on you? I could see something like that as an example on test. None of it's too hard. They could give you a graph, or you could graph it out, but then you're gonna have to explain what happens in that particular part. Like, oh, the price is gonna come down, or the quantity is gonna go up, or whatever might happen. I could see maybe that occurring. All right, hopefully that helps, and until next time.